Greetings, friends! Juan Ingruski here, and this is the weekly Russian-Ukraine War update for the week of November 24th through November 30th of 2025. If you want to continue receiving these weekly Russian-Ukraine War updates, be sure to subscribe to my channel, give this video a thumbs up, comment your thoughts, and I hope you guys have an awesome day so far. And this week, this is the end of November, and we're going to begin in the Huliaipole, Zaporizhia, Dnipropetrovsk area, because this week the big news is that the battle for Huliaipole has begun. We say this because the Russians have actually officially entered Huliaipole and are now battling for the town. They have entered from two axes. The first axis is from the eastern direction, this area right here. You know, the Russians have basically been right on the outskirts of Huliaipole since 2022, essentially. As you can see, the front line's been kind of static right around Mariupol and such. But because of the Russian envelopment from the north, it seems like they were able to capturing these towns of Vatrasok and Zelena, which we talked about last week. We don't have any confirmation. We actually don't have any of those flag-raising operations yet, so maybe they're still trying to clear them. But most mappers, even neutral ones, are saying that Zelena and Vatrasok has been taken by the Russians, and because these villages fell, this is probably what allowed the Russians to enter and capture the most eastern part of Huliaipole, this area right here. And also capturing these warehouses right here is very good because these are more fortified areas than just the residential, like one-story buildings here. But in any case, capturing this eastern part is a very good gain for the Russians. This will give the Russians a starting off point to continue pushing this way and kind of just overcoming all the trenches that the Ukrainians have right on the outskirts of Huliaipole. So just capturing more and more of this area. And that's what I expect the Russians to do. Along with this, the Russians, if we look at the north, the Russians have completely captured the village of Zaporizhia here. This kind of small village here. We had the Russians raising their flags all over the place here. So this was one of the last barriers to the entrance here. And a lot of sources are saying the Russians have entered from the north here. I talked about how I thought the Russians would take the northern part first, but it seems like they were able to enter the eastern part. Though we don't actually have any geolocation confirmation of this, so we need to maybe wait for more evidence, but a lot of maps are saying this is the case. But also from the north, they're saying that a lot of the Russians are entering. They've captured a bunch of these warehouses. They've captured, you know, some of these streets right here. And so I'm betting that if this is the case, the Russians will then try to continue pushing this way, try to capture this residential area in the north here, just as the Russians are trying to capture this residential area in the southeastern part of Huliaipole. The main kind of resistance area that I think the Ukrainians will try to put up with is in the center part of Huliaipole, this area right here, which has actually all the built-up areas. It has some high-rise buildings and such. So this is, and it's on the other side of the river. So you know, it has a bunch of trenches here that defends it from an attack directly from the south. It has a river to its back, so it could be protected from the north. And then, you know, the only thing is that the Russians will then enter it from the east here, if they continue pushing in this direction. So this is probably where the Ukrainians will have a holdout. The Ukrainians are actually sending, in general, in this general kind of Zaporizhia, Dnipropetrovsk, Huliaipole direction, the Ukrainians are sending a bunch of reinforcements after all the Ukrainian channels were saying about how catastrophic the situation is. They finally sent reinforcements, and that's actually why we're seeing a slowdown. So I do think the Ukrainians are holding up to their next defense line, which is around the towns of Myrnohrad, and, you know, kind of in this area, because it's on the other side of the river, and this is where they built up their next defense. So if you look at the fortification map, there's a bunch of trenches in this area. So it looks like the Russians will take everything behind the river of Hanshur, I think it's called, the Hanshur River. Yeah, the Hanshur River. So they'll probably take the rest of these villages. A lot of sources, even from today, said that the town of village of Dnipropetrovsk has been taken by the Russians, though we don't have any confirmation of that just yet. A lot of, you know, we saw more. We had videos of the Russians being in these fields here, getting drones. So, you know, the Russians are slowly but surely pushing through these fields, probably accumulating forces in Uspanivka, Rovopolia, and are trying to push towards Dnipropetrovsk, Voronovka here. Try and take basically the rest of the fields and villages that are on the other side of the Hanshur River, and the Ukrainians are going to be retreating to the other side. So I think, you know, soon they'll, you know, reach these two villages to the north here, and then battle for Huliaipole, which will be the main focus of the Axis. So I think that the Ukrainians probably are bringing in enough forces to prevent a breakthrough to the other side across Zaporizhia. But right now, that hasn't stopped the Russians from now getting one of the big prizes of their breakthrough in this direction, which is Huliaipole. So we shall see how that develops. And yeah, that's basically been the main thing that happened here in this direction. Yeah, so yeah, that's basically it. The battle for Huliaipole has begun. and we shall see how that develops. There's been no other changes here. The only other changes, if we kind of look into the northern part here, is that some Ukrainian sources are saying that they have recaptured all of Ivanovka, but we actually don't have any geolocation of that. Only Deep State has been reporting this, but that's something to keep in mind. That we've mentioned this before. The Ukrainians do have the possibility to start battling and trying to enter Ivanovka from the west here, because they have these positions in these two big villages here in Garlovka and such. So it is possible for the Ukrainians to try to break the Russian bridge here, which is very tenuous because it has to be supplied across the Volga River here. But we have no geolocation confirmation of that. So we're still saying that Ivanovka is under Russian control, but just something to keep in mind. The battle for Novopalovka is also still ongoing. The entire southern part has been captured. As we saw last week, the Russians have positions on the other side of the on the other side of the river here, but it's just a big question of like what's the situation of the like what's happening on the other side of the river here. So battle for Novopalovka is still ongoing as well. So anyway, that is the Huliaipole direction, and there's been no other really changes in the rest of the Zaporizhia. Alrighty, now we're going to go to the Pokrovsk direction, the Myrnohrad pocket, as I call it. This week, the Russians are continuously just squeezing out the Myrnohrad pocket and are now pushing the Ukrainians out from each direction, just slow but surely. In the Pokrovsk direction in general, one of the biggest news from this week in this direction is that the battle for Grishny has begun. We had geolocated confirmation of the Russians being right on the outskirts, right in this area. So a lot of sources are saying that this kind of these first kind of few buildings on the most southern part of Grishny have been captured, which gives the Russians a bridgehead to continue pushing. Now, Grishny, I think, is basically just a bunch of residential areas, but this is where the Ukrainians have fallen back to once Pokrovsk fell and all that. So there's probably a lot of Ukrainian troops here. They could still be supplied. So it's gonna be the Russians will have to it's going to be very hard for the Russians to, every step they take in Grishny is going to be a pretty hard battle, but I think they have the possibility to push the Ukrainians further out. We see this with the Russians, building up, capturing a bunch of these fields between Grishny and Klotna here. A lot of sources are saying that the Pokrovsk mining shaft, this area right here, has been captured. We had geolocated confirmation of the Russians being bombed, at least in the southern part. So if the Russians are in the southern part, they probably have captured this northern part here. I actually have no idea what this, this very north thing here. Is this, the mine itself? Is this, I don't know what exactly this is. I don't know what I'm looking at. But this the actual built-up industrial, mine shaft has been captured by the Russians. So this is a very good defensive stronghold that the Russians could use for drone operators and such. So yeah, that's very good on the western side of Pokrovsk. Along this, we had more geolocated confirmation of the Russians being in these kind of fields that are to the, these warehouses that are to the north of Pokrovsk here. So, in these dachas. So it does prove that these kind of warehouses between Radinsky and Pokrovsk, where they actually had physically encircled the Ukrainian troops in Myrnohrad, is pretty much more solidified. Again, it's very fluid. I talk about this every week, but it does show that there's more and more Russian troops being solidified here. And as we look in the southern part of Pokrovsk, we're seeing that Russian troops are just walking about very leisurely in this kind of southern part of Pokrovsk in this area. So it does show that a lot, everything probably below the rail line is probably pretty secure for the Russians. And it's only the northern part where it's mostly under Russian control, but we're probably still the Ukrainians could still try to enter the most northern part of it. So. But, Pokrovsk, as I said, has basically fallen. They're now pushing more and more towards Grishny, towards these warehouses to the north. And this is basically spells doom for Myrnohrad. Now, speaking of Myrnohrad, we talked about last week that the Russians have cleared the southern part of Myrnohrad. We had another geolocation of the Russians getting bombed in this kind of citadel right here by a drone. So it does show that this kind of citadel right here is at least under partial Russian control. We don't know if it's under full Russian control. But the fact the Russians are getting bombed here shows that this kind of southern part is probably under full Russian control. The biggest news, which I haven't personally seen any geolocation of this, but a lot of mappers, even neutral mappers, are saying it's true, is that the Russians are breaking into Myrnohrad from the north here. The biggest news is that the Russians have captured more and more of this residential area in the northeastern part of Myrnohrad, and they have captured this northern citadel of Myrnohrad right here. There was a video that was shown of the Ukrainians capturing a Russian soldier right in this mine shaft. There's this right here. So it does show that the Russians are bleeding right into the center of Myrnohrad. Yeah, I don't know if this is a terracon or not. Yeah, but I think this is like a mining shaft or something. Anyway, the Russians are bleeding into this area. They got the soldiers got captured here, which does show that there's Russian operations happening here. The biggest news is that, which I have not seen, is that the Russians are completely capturing this like eastern citadel, which is complete. I thought the citadel would last for a long time, but again, I've been proven wrong about this. As I show, for example, the southern citadel Pokrovsk fell very rapidly, so longer than I thought. So these kind of high-rise buildings are like basically getting captured a lot faster than I would have expected. So. But anyway, haven't seen any videos of this yet. I haven't like seen any Russians getting bombed here. But a lot of mappers are saying that this like eastern citadel is falling. So basically, this like Myrnohrad area is slowly but surely collapsing. I'm pretty certain the Russians will probably take this by the end of the year, by the end of December. The Russians are also continuously pushing this way. They have captured completely the village of Ravinia. I have no doubts that the Russians are now entering the village of Seversk here, and just continuously just pressing it from the east here, just as they're pressing from the north and from the south. Basically from everywhere. So the Myrnohrad pocket is slowly but surely disintegrating before our very eyes. Along with this, in the northern sector, the Russians are, this is where the Ukrainians were on the attack a lot, but now it seems like they've kind of pushed a lot of reinforcements from the Pokrovsk direction and kind of accepted the defeat of Myrnohrad. It seems like they're not even going to be trying to deblockade it anymore. It seems like that's what they were trying to aim for, but it seems like they're now kind of moving on from that. And just kind of going on a more defensive posture, and because of that, the Russians are now regaining the initiative here. The biggest news is that after the capture of Shakova, is that the Russians are now pushing northwards and have actually started the battle for Sofivka. That the Russians have captured the southern part of Sofivka, and then actually, because the Russians were already in this kind of area near the reservoir here, they actually broke through and actually captured some positions in the northern part of Sofivka. So it seems like the Ukrainian garrison of Sofivka is in very big trouble. Their saving grace is that the village of Tereska is on the other side of the Kerensky-Teresk River. The Ukrainians could use this to attack, but again, they have to cross the river, which will be hard to do. And the Ukrainians could attack from here, but again, there's not a lot. But Sofia is very much more in a precarious situation. The Ukrainians could try to. It's easier for them to hold on to Sofivka because they have a lot more areas to attack from, but it does show that, it's very much possible the Russians take Sofivka and then are able to use it as a forward operating base to hold off any other attacks. So, especially from this direction. But, so the battle for Sofivka is ongoing now, so that's very good news for the Russians. A lot of mappers are saying that, the Russians are pushed, before we saw the Ukrainians were in Zaporizhia, but a lot of mappers are now saying, we actually had geological confirmation of the Russians being in Dorozhezhny here, this village right here, and mappers are now saying the Russians have cleared, like, kind of this area behind this rail line, and have captured a bunch of this area right here. Well, they were here, but like this kind of like field right here around Zaporizhia has been cleared. We still don't know the exact positionings of Sushensky. Maybe it's like a big gray zone. I have doubts that the Ukrainians have like settled troops here. But again, this entire area is very much a big gray zone. We've mentioned this for the last few months. The expansion of solidified Russian control is being more and more affirmed here. So I have no doubts that probably that the Russians are just trying to like solidify themselves along this rail line here, and the Ukrainians are falling back to more defensive positions. They don't want to keep sending troops here to, be sacrificed, so just so they could have some positions in these fields here. It looks like they're going to try to hold on to Blisky, which is a very strong fortified town here, and along with this like kind of industrial zone here. So they're probably trying to put a more defensive posture here and then just stop putting troops through. That's probably why the Russians are able to secure themselves here. Same thing in Rudinsky. We don't have news that the Rudinsky has been completely captured, but I have, with the general fallback of Ukrainian troops here putting less and less attacks, they're probably going to stop trying to continue putting troops into Rudinsky, and the Russians will recapture it. So we just need to wait and see for that. Also, the Russians are just trying to like flatten their fronts between Shakova and the rail line here. A lot of maps are saying they're trying to like kind of create this kind of buffer zone, kind of like this, between Novashakova and Shakova here, and then this would kind of make a northern flank here, northern defense flank here, and yeah. So lots of the Russians are now fully on the offense, fully in the initiative seat in Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad. Before, at least the Ukrainians were attacking, at least in the northern part here, but it seems like now the Russians are slowly but surely collapsing the Myrnohrad pocket. They're pushing out of Pokrovsk to secure it more fully, and they are protecting their northern flank here a lot better. So a lot of good news for the Russians in the Pokrovsk-Myrnohrad area. Now we're going to go to the Kostyantynivka direction. Some small changes are happening in the battle for Kostyantynivka. The biggest news is, just some small changes. Actually, not that much changes. The biggest change is a lot of movements have been happening in this northern part here. There's a bunch of trenches that were built here that were supposed to be kind of built along this like Bilka reservoir. And after the Russians took Yablunovka and Alexander Kilanovo, they kind of stopped because there's a river here. But it seems like they're now crossing the river, and we had geolocation of the Russians capturing the small stronghold right here. So we had map updates showing the Russians capturing more and more of these fields to the north of Yablunovka. So I have no doubts the Russians are right now clearing these like trenches that are up to the north of Yablunovka, these trenches aren't just like trenches on the ground. There's like some fortified areas. So this gives the Russians a more forward operating base to settle troops in, and to prepare for a future assault, maybe towards Stepanovka or Berestokh or something like that. One of the biggest gains, if the Russians continue pushing this direction, will be this giant stronghold right here, which will you actually can even see it on the map here. So, if the Russians could take this, it would be a very big gain for the Russian operation here. Now, where the Russians have been made the most successful in the battle for Kostyantynivka, this area right here. We talked about how the Russians captured Ivanopolia last week, and we had more geolocate confirmation of the Russians being in this northern part here. We have the Russians being droned in this positions here. So it looks like the Russians are now just kind of pushing right along the river, and now I have no doubts that the Russians probably are more secure in these positions in the southeastern part of Kostyantynivka. So these advances in these like villages to the south here were probably just to create a stable supply route from Russian positions in Kostyantynivka towards where probably their how do you say it? Their supply network is in Seversk. Probably this is where Russia's probably using Seversk as a supply hub. And if you move from Seversk, they could continue pushing towards using these villages to hide their troops as they enter Kostyantynivka. So yeah, it seems like the Russians are now in Kostyantynivka, and they're now expanding their bridgehead in the southeastern part of it. So that's very good news for the Russians. So we'll see how they continue expanding their presence here. My guess is they'll continue. Kostyantynivka is split in half by the Kerensky-Terezk River, and just as the Russians will help use that to their advantage, they'll continue pushing along the rail line, continue breaking into Kostyantynivka from this direction, at least secure themselves everything behind this highway, and then continue pushing this way, capturing more and more of this residential area, probably the main goal is to solidify themselves in this position right here in Kostyantynivka. And then I do think that if they continue pushing towards the more northwestern part of Kostyantynivka, that makes them more likely to be attacked from Ukrainian positions in the north here, because the Russians have been pushed from Chasiv Yar. So they might, at this point, start trying to activate in this direction, and try to start, encircling Kostyantynivka from the west here. So, but we shall see how the battle for Kostyantynivka develops. A bit more to the north, we had a lot of mappers are now changing their maps, saying that the village of Maisky has been taken. So that makes sense. It's a small little village, nothing much here, but it does show that the Russians are just improving their northern positions here. And yeah, so Maisky has fallen, and yeah, so that's the Kostyantynivka direction. Now, in the Seversk direction, and we talked about how the battle for Seversk happened last week after the Russians did a big breakthrough into Seversk. That has not changed. We actually had more geolocate confirmation of the Russians being in the northern part of Seversk this time. For some reason, my thing shot itself. All right, there we go. Anyway, in any case, the Russians are in this northern part of Seversk. We had geolocation confirmation of that. A lot of mappers are saying that the battle for Seversk is northern. This is like the most fortified area where the Ukrainians are trying to protect. But they said that pro-Russian sources are saying that the Russians have captured this. Now, obviously we need more proof of that, but we had proof of the Russians being at least in the northern part right here. And so, combine that with the proof we had last week of the Russians being in the southern part of Seversk, it does show that the battle for Seversk is ongoing. The Russians are breaking into from every area, and we just basically for us on who are not on the ground, we're just waiting for more information to show what's the exact positioning of Seversk. So, but it's very much possible that the battle for Seversk could end by the end of the year. It's very much possible. Because the Russians are slowly squeezing out all the logistics. It's very bad for the Ukrainians in Seversk. So, yeah, the Russians are in the northern part of Seversk now. We had not got any more geolocations of the Russians being in the southern part of Seversk. So, we just need to wait to see if they've consolidated here or if they got kicked out. There's a lot of more unknowns, but we had more proof that the Russians are in more parts of Seversk than last week. Also, in the southern part here, a lot of the Russian Ministry of Defense say they have completely captured the village of Vasilivka here. We also talked about how they took the village of Pazanio. However, I feel like this is just them bullshitting. I don't think they actually have captured that. They have not released any video showing themselves capturing this. There's been no geolocations of the Russians being here. The Russians have been in the eastern part of Vasilivka here, but that's supposed to be because it's split in half by a river, so they've been able to conquer this part of the river, but the Ukrainians were able to hold on here. So now, if they have taken Pazadno and taken a bunch of these trenches that give them the slight tactical height advantage, then yeah, they can take Vasilivka here. But so we just need more proof that this is the case. But yeah, this is something to keep in mind. And then yeah, that's basically it for the Seversk direction. In the Lyman direction, we have the Russians are still pushing and trying to encircle Lyman. The biggest news is the Russians in the southern part here. The Russians have captured one major Ukrainian stronghold here. This stronghold along in this river here has been captured by the Russians. They also captured more of these forest area in the south of Yampil, and it seems like a lot of sources are saying the Russians have entered the village of Dobrova here and are now right on the outskirts of the village of Orozhina here. So it does seem like the Russians are trying to take these two villages just to fully encircle Lyman from the south here. So right now the Russians are right on the outskirts of Dobrova and Orozhina. And if they take it, they'll reach the Seversky Donetsk River, they'll be then able to then start entering Lyman securely from the south here. But I do think the Russians will keep pushing along these using the river as defense and keep pushing towards Stara Karavovna and Brushivka here. Along with this, the Russians have basically cleared out any Ukrainians in these swamps in the north here near Yampil. So I have my theory is that the Russians will take Dobrova or Orozhina, and then once they do that, they'll be able to take Zakhikna here. And then once they take Zakhikna, the Russians will then use their positions in these kind of villages here to then move southwards and then cut off any Ukrainian troops that are trying to hold on to Seversk in a more elevated high ground positions in these kind of fields here. So that's my theory. Along with this, the Russians are some sources are saying the Russians have captured this school. I think it is this area right here. Yeah, school number 2. The Russians have occupied the small school right here. We also have talked about how the Russians have captured this area, this kind of like Lyman dachas right here. And we also had some sources are saying the Russians are kind of battling for this area right here, trying to enter this area of Lyman. So we had geolocations of the Russians being in these dachas, but we need more, and we also had proof of the Russians being in this school right here. But we need more to see if the Russians are able to consolidate themselves in this kind of southeastern part of Lyman. So we shall see how that develops. But the conquest of Orozhina and Dobrova will allow the Russians to actually capture this southeastern part of Lyman more securely. And there's been no other really big changes in the Lyman direction. Alrighty, now we're going to go to the Kharkov Kupyansk direction, and let's start from the south north to north. The biggest news is that the Russians have kind of activated in this area near the Borova area. We talked about last week. The Russians were pushing towards the village of Bushishlavka here and managed to had some troops be dismounted, but they were getting bombed, so we don't know if they consolidated or not, but it does show the Russians were attacking towards this direction. And this week we had more. The Russians did another attack where they were getting bombed, and they were getting in this area right here. So it does show the Russians are, pushing. There's a bunch of trenches that are surrounding Borova because it's a very strong, logistics point for the Ukrainians on the other side of the Oskol River. So the Russians have captured some strongholds. But we'll see if the Russians are able to consolidate. So, but it does show that the Russians are activating in this direction. And I think the main goal for the Russians is to try to take Bukoslavka, Novoplanovka, and reach the Oskil River here, and this will allow them to maybe start entering Borova from the north here, but we shall see how that develops. But yeah, the activation from Borsivka and Andriivka is definitely interesting. We just need to see if they consolidate or not. In Kupyansk itself, we've had some changes. We had a GLK confirmation of the Russians dismounting in the northern part of Petropolovka right here. So this kind of like these like some small areas right here has been captured by the Russians, but it does show that probably Petropolovka has not fallen, as a lot of people have said. Maybe that's an old video that we're seeing, but the video I saw the Russians being in this northern part here. So I think the Russians are in Petropolovka, but have not captured it. So we have to keep, that's just something to keep in mind. So, but we had a video of the Russians being in the northern part at least. But in terms of the claim that they captured it, I think it's baloney. In terms of Kupyansk itself, the Ukrainians are still doing massive counterattacks to try to dislodge the Russians. But they're trying to retake fuck, I can't pronounce anything today. Kindershivka here. And, trying to break through, again, the Russian logistics here is very precarious here. And, I talked about, they should have, protected their flanks a bit more. But it did kind of pay off. They did almost completely take Kupyansk. But now it's very hard for the Russians to hold on here as the Ukrainians keep doing counterattacks here. But, yeah, so Kupyansk is not completely captured. They're still in this the southern part here. The Ukrainians are also, counterattacking and trying to enter, the southern part here. So, and, cross the river and try to enter the southern part of Kupyansk here. So the Russians are trying to, expand, but also the Ukrainians are counterattacking. So it's a lot of back and forth. The Ukrainians really don't want to lose Kupyansk, but, so far there's only been some small changes on either side here. And now we're going to go to the kind of the same area in the Kharkov area in Volchansk. The battle for Volchansk is about to end. The Russians are making rapid progress in this, not rapid, but progress in this direction as compared to before. The biggest news is that the Russians are continuously taking more and more of the southeastern part of Volchansk, these residential areas. We had geolocations of the Russians being here. So a lot of sources are saying that more and more of this residential area was captured in the last week by the Russians. So as you can see, the Russians will probably continue pushing this way until they capture the rest of these residential areas. It's a bit of a formality because they just, if they want to capture Volchansk completely, they have to just take every building here. But it's pretty hard. Strategically, they took all the strongholds, the fortified areas, so they've taken everything they needed from Volchansk. But if they want to announce the liberation of the town, they probably need to capture the rest of this, just a few more buildings here. So, but yeah, they're continuously pushing this way. One of the biggest news is that Russians are now actually pushing southwards here. We had geolocation of the Russians being in the northern part of Lyman here, in Kharkov, not in Donetsk, so a different type of Lyman. So the Russians have captured the northern part of this town here, and I'm pretty certain that that this village is pretty small. So I'm betting the Russians will take the rest of Lyman pretty soon, probably next week. We also had geolocation of the Russians entering the eastern part of Vilcha here. This is it looks very nice. I don't know, this looks aesthetically pleasing. This is an aesthetically pleasing village here. Anyway, so Vilcha has been entered from the eastern part. And a lot of sources are saying the Russians are trying to enter it from the north here. So I do think the village of Vilcha will be conquered by the Russians. And the Russians will move southwards along the Seversk Donetsk River as a defense. And my bet at the moment is that the Russians will probably take everything up to here for the moment. And then, the Russians will take Volchansk. And so the Ukrainians will retreat to Byly-Kolodosky here, but they'll use these empty fields here as a no man's land between Volchansk and Byly-Kolodosky. But I do think the Russians will then focus more using Volchansk as a as a logistics base to continue pushing southwards here, and just kind of outflank, kind of move in tandem with the Russian troops who will take Kupyansk, who will then move to the east here, and then obviously the Russians pushing from the Molova bridgehead here. So it's just another pressure point to squeeze the Ukrainians out of this area in Kharkov. But besides that, there's been no other real changes in anywhere else, not in Sumy. So yeah, that's the end of this video. So I hope you guys enjoyed this weekly Russian career update. Just wanted to give you guys an update though. I'm going to be going on vacation, so there won't be a video next week, but there'll probably be a video the week after that. Just depends. But yeah, I probably either December 14th will be the next video or the week after that, for sure though. If I don't do it on the 14th, but yeah, so there won't be a weekly video next week, but I'll be back after 2 or 3 weeks, the week after that, or 2 weeks after that. So, but yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. Be sure to subscribe to my channel to continue receiving these weekly Russian-Ukrainian updates. Like this video, comment your thoughts. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. So aim high and wander on.